Morning, Anne. I'd like to talk to you about holiday pay. For something which, on the face of it, seems like such a straightforward thing. Somebody goes on holiday and they get paid for it. I know there are bear traps and it's surprisingly complicated. Could you tell me a little bit more, please?
Yes, indeed. The bear traps really revolve around questions about whether employees should get paid holiday pay in certain circumstances and also how to calculate that holiday pay.
Okay, and does it apply to all holidays?
It applies not to contractual holidays, so anything above the statutory minimum, employers can deal with however they want.
Okay, and any other types of holiday?
Yes, the statutory holidays are the ones to look out for, and they're governed by the working time regulations,
Right.
which is basically a health and safety measure that says people need to go on holiday as a break from work, and in order to persuade them to go on holiday, they must be paid properly for that holiday. Just as an interesting aside, until working time regs came in, there was no law in the UK that said holidays had to be paid.
Right, so the working time regulations are at the heart of this. And how many days will be included within working time regulations in this context?
Although the UK law says that 28 days is the minimum under working time regulations, actually this particular issue about holiday pay is governed by the directive from which the regulations are derived from Europe, and that only applies to the first 20 days of holiday. So we're talking about the first 20 days of anybody's holiday.
First 20 days. And for those first 20 days, what are the issues that apply to those?
There are two main questions. One is, if you've got an employee on long-term sick, are they accruing holiday and therefore holiday pay? And the other question is, how do you calculate holiday pay? What do you take into account as part of somebody's average pay to be paid while they're on holiday?
Okay, so let's pick the first one. You mentioned long-term sick. So someone who's long-term sick, could be entitled to holiday pay.
Yes, I know it sounds completely counterintuitive and it's very annoying, but somebody who has been off work for even 3 years will still be accruing holiday pay. There's been a lot of case law about this, and that really is where we've got to now, that somebody who is off on long-term sick is entitled to at least the 20 days holiday pay. And bear in mind, of course, to take some comfort from the fact that you may have somebody off with a serious depressive illness, and a trip to Disneyland may be just the ticket to help them in their illness, but they're at that, and that's a holiday, but whilst they're on long-term sick.
Obviously, great to see an employee recover from a long-term sick period, but I mean, this is something that would be very easy for an employer to miss. And an employee might be off long-term sick. They're still on the books, but not necessarily. They might have used up all their statutory sick pay, won't be being paid. Now that could be quite expensive. How far back should an employer, or can an employee go to claim this holiday pay?
Again, there's been quite a lot of case law on this, and although it's not absolutely bottomed out, rule of thumb now is that an employee can go back 18 months. So given that they're entitled to 20 days holiday pay per year, that would be 30 days holiday pay in total. Even if they've been off work for 6 years, they can't go back the whole 6 years, only the last 18 months.
So it's very important for members to think about the potential scope of holiday pay on long-term sick employees, because that can become quite expensive. And you talked about how far back people need to think about that. In terms of the calculation, though, how is holiday pay calculated?
Well, in the old days of the partnership at work, in our industry at any rate, holiday pay was paid at basic pay rate. However, that has been now superseded because the courts have taken a very different view. Again, back to working time regs. If you're going to make people go on holiday, you've got to pay them the proper rate. And there's been a lot of case law about whether other things, such as, for instance, commission or overtime payments, should be averaged out when you're calculating somebody's holiday pay.
So partnership and work applied when the industry was not quite as varied as it is now. It disappeared off into the dim and distant past, but actually it's been superseded by a lot of case law anyway. So there are a couple of different strands that seem to have come through to me here. One is the need to think about holiday pay when an employee is off, particularly on long-term sick, but actually also the scope of what needs to be brought into that calculation. That's clearly quite complicated. That lack of clarity isn't terribly helpful, is it?
Lack of clarity is the last thing that any business person needs ever. But unfortunately, with holiday pay, it's still not entirely clear. As I say, commission, definitely, it has been decided that commission must be taken into account. As far as overtime goes, if it's compulsory overtime, that must also be taken into account. as far as voluntary overtime goes, and I know a lot of our members have tried to get around this by talking about their overtime being voluntary. However, the direction of travel is certainly that even that may be caught by the working time regs, particularly if voluntary overtime actually turns out to be something that's done on a very regular basis, to the extent that you might even consider it to be contractual. So all of those need to be taken into account. There's still some resistance out there. The unions, however, are very keen on this because it's quite a quick win for them.
Yeah.
You could find yourself with quite a backlog of pay if you don't at least take this into account, consider your strategy and make a reserve for it.
So I think I suppose the important point for members is firstly to think about where employees are off, the scope of holiday pay. Secondly, to consider the basis of calculation of holiday pay, and that's the methodology is built up over case law over a long period of time, and that's quite specialist. So having thought about it, clearly it would be a very good idea for them to take specialist advice just to ensure that they get their approach right, because it can become very expensive. Thank you very much, Anne. That's very interesting.